They called it a flying milk bottle, a 7-ton monster. Some pilots, when they first laid eyes on the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt in 1942, openly laughed. Picture this. A young American pilot, fresh from training in the sleek P-40 Warhawk, walks onto the tarmac at Duxford, England. The morning fog hasn't lifted. He's expecting his combat assignment, dreaming perhaps of the nimble Spitfire he's seen the RAF boys fly. Then he sees it. The P-47 squats on the runway like a prize fighter who ate too much Thanksgiving dinner. Its fuselage, thick, round, almost comically rotund, dwarfs every other fighter on the field. At 14,000 pounds fully loaded, it weighs as much as 2 Messerschmitt Bf-10-9s. The cockpit sits so far back, the pilot jokes he needs a periscope to see where he's going. "Christ," the young pilot mutters. "They expect me to dogfight in that?" His squadron mates aren't more encouraging. "The Jug," they nickname it, short for Juggernaut, but it might as well stand for jug of milk. Compared to the graceful elliptical wings of the Spitfire or the predatory angles of the Mustang, the Thunderbolt looks like it was designed by a man who'd never seen an airplane. Just a very large bathtub with wings. But here's what that young pilot, and every Luftwaffe pilot who underestimated the Jug, would soon learn. This wasn't a European fighter. This was an American fighter. And in the skies over Europe, that distinction would mean everything. To understand the P-47, you have to understand what America was trying to build, and more importantly, what it wasn't trying to build. In 1940, when Republic Aviation's chief designer Alexander Kartveli sat at his drafting table, European air combat had already been raging for a year. The lessons seemed clear. Build light, build agile, build something that could turn inside a Messerschmitt at 15,000 feet. But Kartveli, a Georgian immigrant who'd fled the Russian Revolution, had a different philosophy. He'd studied the reports from the Battle of Britain. He'd read the casualty lists. And he'd noticed something the Europeans seemed to overlook. Dead pilots don't win wars. "We will build," Kartveli reportedly told his team, "a fighter that brings its pilot home." The heart of his design was almost absurdly ambitious. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine. 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows. 2,000 horsepower, more than any fighter engine in the world. This mechanical beast weighed 2,350 pounds by itself, nearly as much as an entire British Spitfire Mark I. To harness that power at high altitude, Kartveli designed a turbocharger system that required complex ducting running through the fuselage. To protect that system, and the pilot, he wrapped the aircraft in armor plating. The cockpit alone had a 1.5-inch bulletproof glass windscreen and armor plates behind the pilot's head and beneath his seat. The result? A fighter that looked like someone had strapped wings to a water heater. When the first P-47Bs arrived in England with the 56th Fighter Group in January 1943, the reception was underwhelming. Major Hub Zemke, the group's commander, later wrote in his memoir, "The ship seemed to be built around a milk bottle." My first reaction was one of complete disbelief. The numbers told the story. Maximum speed at 30,000 feet, 433 miles per hour, respectable, but the Spitfire 9 could do 408 miles per hour and looked like it was going faster, just sitting still. Rate of climb, sluggish below 15,000 feet. The Bf-109G could spiral up to intercept altitude, while the P-47 was still labouring through the medium altitudes. And the weight. Dear God, the weight. At 12,500 pounds empty, it was nearly twice as heavy as a Zero. Pilots transferred from the P-40 Warhawk, itself no lightweight, found the controls almost unnervingly heavy. One pilot described his first takeoff. "I thought I'd grabbed hold of an anvil with wings. The damn thing didn't want to fly. It wanted to work its way into the air." Early combat reports from the spring of 1943 were sobering. In turning engagements below 20,000 feet, Luftwaffe pilots in WWIIs could literally fly circles around the Thunderbolt. The P-47's wide turning radius earned it another, less affectionate nickname, the lead sled. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski, who would become the top P-47 ace in Europe with 28 victories, admitted years later, "For the first 3 months flying the P-47, I was convinced I was going to die in it. It felt like trying to dogfight in a Greyhound bus." But then something shifted. Not in the airplane, in how pilots understood what they were flying. The turning point, quite literally, came at altitude. April 15th, 1943. Captain Don Blakesley, a veteran of the Eagle squadrons who'd flown Spitfires with the RAF, leads his 4th Fighter Group on an escort mission deep into Germany. At 27,000 feet over Emden, his flight encounters a group of FW-19s. The German pilots, confident and experienced, initiate their standard attack, a slashing dive from above, then a climbing spiral to regain altitude, a maneuver that had been shredding American bomber formations for months. Blakesley doesn't try to turn with them. Instead, he does something that feels completely counterintuitive. He shoves his throttle to the firewall and rolls into a steeper dive than the diving FW-190s. What happens next rewrites the tactical manual. The P-47, that overweight bathtub with wings, accelerates like a stone dropped from heaven. The airspeed indicator spins past 450 miles per hour, 500 miles per hour, 550 miles per hour. The controls stiffen. The aircraft feels like it's bolted to rails. But it's stable. Rock solid. Blakesley pulls up underneath the climbing German fighters. The R-2800 engine, gulping compressed air from its turbocharger, doesn't falter. Unlike German fighters whose engines would choke and sputter in the thin air above 25,000 feet, the Double Wasp was just getting started. The P-47 climbs like an elevator. The German pilots, looking over their shoulders, see something impossible. The American fighter they'd just outmaneuvered is above them now, with speed to spare. Blakesley's 8.50 caliber machine guns, 4 in each wing, open fire. The Luftwaffe pilot never knew what hit him. Back at Debden, Blakesley's debrief changes everything. "Stop trying to turn with them," he tells his pilots. "This isn't a dogfighter. It's a diver. Get above them, dive through them, and extend away. If they follow you down, you'll walk away from them. If they don't, climb back up and do it again." It was pure American thinking. Don't fight the enemy's fight. Use your advantages, and the P-47 had advantages that were only now becoming apparent. That 2,000 horsepower engine? At altitude, with the turbocharger boosting intake pressure, it could sustain 2,300 horsepower for short bursts. Above 25,000 feet, the P-47 was the fastest fighter in the European theatre. Period. That weight everyone complained about? In a dive, it was a gift from physics. While German fighters had to pull back on their dives or risk structural failure, the P-47 could dive at speeds approaching 550 miles per hour and pull out without losing a rivet. Test pilots at Republic had put the airframe through 12 G stress tests. It was overbuilt to a degree that would make German engineers weep or gasp at the waste of materials. And those 8.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns? They fired a combined 100 rounds per second. Pilots who'd flown the Hurricane with its .303 caliber guns, basically rifle rounds, couldn't believe the destructive power. The 50 caliber didn't just punch holes in aircraft, it tore them apart. One 2-second burst delivered 200 half-inch diameter slugs, each one capable of piercing engine blocks. Major Gerald Johnson, 56th Fighter Group, described his first kill. "I gave him a 1-second burst, maybe 50 rounds total. The FW-190's wing just departed, peeled off like paper. I'd been shooting rifle rounds for 2 years with the RAF. This was like comparing a firecracker to a stick of dynamite." But perhaps the most important discovery came from the ground crews. Sergeant Mickey Michalowski, a crew chief with the 78th Fighter Group, kept meticulous records, now housed in the National Archives. In his diary entry from May 1943, he notes something remarkable. "Lieutenant Henderson's ship came back today with 73 holes we could count. Flak and 20mm hits. Coolant line severed. Oil leaking from 3 places. The engine was still running. Changed some panels, patched the fuel tanks, and she flew again the next morning. This became the pattern. P-47s came home with damage that would have destroyed other fighters. The massive radial engine acted like a shield. Cannon shells would tear through cylinders, but the other 17 kept running. The armor plating stopped 20mm rounds. The self-sealing fuel tanks, manufactured by US Rubber Company, could take multiple hits and keep flying. German pilots began reporting something disturbing in their debriefs. The American fighters wouldn't die. You could hit them. Solid hits that should send any aircraft spinning into the earth. And they'd just keep flying, keep shooting. But here's where the story transcends one airplane and becomes something larger. Something that explains why the Luftwaffe lost the air war despite having some of the most skilled pilots and advanced designs in the world. The P-47 wasn't just a fighter. It was a product. Let me take you to Evansville, Indiana. September 1942. Republic Aviation opens a second production line at a converted Chrysler factory. The space is cavernous. Formerly built DeSoto automobiles. Now it's building instruments of war. The production line is a miracle of American industrial engineering. Henry Ford's assembly line principles applied to combat aircraft. Each P-47 moved down the line in stages: engine installation, wing attachment, electrical systems, armament, paint, test flight. At peak production in 1944, Republic Aviation's two factories, Farmingdale, New York, and Evansville, were completing one P-47 every 45 minutes. Stop and think about that number. In the time it takes to watch half of a movie, American factory workers, many of them women who'd never worked in manufacturing before the war, would finish another Thunderbolt. The Luftwaffe couldn't compete with this. Not even close. Consider. In 1944, Republic Aviation produced 4,632 P-47s. That same year, Germany's entire fighter production, including Bf-10-9s, FW-190S, Me-262S, and every other design, totaled about 25,000 aircraft. Sounds impressive until you realize that American aircraft production across all types exceeded 96,000 aircraft that year. The P-47 alone accounted for more fighters than the entire Japanese aircraft industry produced in 1944. But raw numbers only tell part of the story. The real advantage was sustainability. When a Luftwaffe pilot was shot down, that pilot often represented hundreds of hours of training, years of experience, and institutional knowledge that couldn't be replaced. The Luftwaffe was hemorrhaging experienced pilots faster than its training schools could replace them. By late 1944, German fighter pilots were entering combat with as little as 50 hours of flight time, barely enough to master takeoffs and landings, let alone air combat. American pilots, by contrast, typically had 200 to 300 hours before entering combat. And if they were shot down over France or Germany, new pilots, well-trained, well-equipped, were already crossing the Atlantic, and they'd be flying brand new P-47s rolling off production lines that never stopped. Major Hub Zemke later reflected, "We could afford to lose aircraft. We could even afford, though we hated it, to lose pilots. But we knew that for every P-47 shot down, 2 more were being built." The Germans had no such comfort. Every fighter they lost was irreplaceable, in practice, if not in theory. The logistical pipeline was equally impressive. Spare parts flowed to English bases in seemingly endless supply. A P-47 with engine damage didn't sit grounded for weeks waiting for parts to be manufactured and shipped. The R2-800 engine was also used in the F-6F Hellcat, the F-4U Corsair, and various transport and bomber aircraft. Supply officers could cannibalize parts from crashed aircraft or requisition from shared parts bins. Captain Robert S. Johnson, who would finish the war as the second highest-scoring P-47 ace with 27 victories, wrote in his memoir, Thunderbolt, about the moment he truly understood what they were part of. "I stood on the flight line at Halesworth in eastern England one evening in June 1944. Thunderbolts as far as I could see. 3 squadrons worth, 36 fighters, all fueled, armed, and ready for the morning mission. I did the math in my head. This was just one group. There were 15 P-47 groups in England alone. That's over 500 Thunderbolts just in the 8th Air Force. Then you had the 9th Air Force, the Mediterranean, the Pacific. I thought about the German pilot I'd fought that morning, skilled, aggressive, flying a good airplane. But no matter how good he was trying to hold back an ocean with a bucket. We weren't just out-fighting them, we were out-producing them into submission. By the summer of 1944, the Jug had evolved from an embarrassment to a legend. The tactics were refined, the pilots were experienced, and the kill ratios started reflecting reality. The 56th Fighter Group, the Wolfpack, became the highest-scoring P-47 group in the European theatre. Flying exclusively Thunderbolts for the entire war, they refused to transition to P-51 Mustangs when offered. They claimed 677 air victories and 311 ground victories. Their tactics were brutal in their efficiency. The dive and zoom approach that Blakesley pioneered became standard doctrine. P-47 flights would patrol at 28,000 to 30,000 feet, well above the altitude where most Luftwaffe fighters operated efficiently. When enemy aircraft were spotted below, they'd roll into a near-vertical dive, accelerate to impossible speeds, rake the target with .50 caliber fire, and extend away at high speed. If the German pilot tried to follow, the P-47 would simply outrun him. If he didn't, the American would zoom, climb back to altitude, and repeat the attack. One Luftwaffe pilot, interrogated after the war, his name withheld in the original OSS report, described the helplessness. You would see them above, always above. Little silver crosses in the sun. You knew they were there, but there was nothing you could do. If you climbed to meet them, they would dive away. If you ignored them, they would dive on you. And when they came down, mein Gott, like a falling stone. The sound alone was terrifying. That huge radial engine at full power. Then the wing guns, all 8 of them. If you were hit, you were not damaged. You were destroyed. The P-47's ruggedness became legendary through individual stories. Lieutenant Colonel Robert S. Johnson, March 1944, attacked by an FW-190 that practically dismantled his aircraft in mid-air. His canopy was shattered. His flight controls were damaged. He had over 200 holes in the airframe. The German pilot, likely out of ammunition, flew alongside and gestured for Johnson to bail out. Johnson refused. He nursed the crippled Thunderbolt back across the channel and landed at his home base. The aircraft was so badly damaged it was written off. Johnson suffered only minor injuries from cockpit fragments. When asked later why he didn't bail out, Johnson said simply, "I trusted my airplane more than I trusted a German prison camp." The P-47 had never let me down. I wasn't about to abandon her. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Thunderbolt had achieved air supremacy over Western Europe. Of the 2,395 8th and 9th Air Force fighters providing cover for the invasion, roughly 1,700 were P-47s. German fighters made only scattered appearances. The Luftwaffe had learned the hard way that challenging American fighters in daylight was suicide. The P-47's role evolved. With the skies relatively clear, Thunderbolts transitioned to ground attack, and here, that legendary ruggedness paid dividends again. Loaded with bombs, rockets, and napalm, P-47s became tank killers. The Germans called them Jabos, and they feared them more than almost any other Allied weapon. A P-47 could carry a 2,500-pound bomb load, equivalent to many light bombers, while maintaining its defensive capabilities. The thick skin that made it heavy for dogfighting made it nearly immune to ground fire. While the sleek P-51 Mustang, with its liquid-cooled engine, could be brought down by a lucky rifle shot to the coolant system, the P-47 would fly through storms of flak that would shred other aircraft. Colonel Francis Gabreski described a ground attack mission over France. "We went in at 200 feet, shooting up everything that moved. The Germans threw everything at us. Rifle fire, machine guns, 20mm cannons, 88mm flak guns. It was like flying through a thunderstorm made of metal. My aircraft took 37 hits that we counted later. The engine never missed a beat. That's when I stopped calling her the Jug and started calling her Darling. In the end, the P-47. Thunderbolt destroyed 3,752 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat, more than any other Allied fighter except the P-51 Mustang. It flew 546,000 combat sorties. It destroyed 9,000 locomotives, 86,000 railway cars, 68,000 trucks, and 6,000 armoured vehicles. But those numbers, impressive as they are, miss the larger truth. The P-47 represented something the Axis powers never understood until it was too late. The American way of war wasn't about building the most elegant solution or the most technically advanced weapon. It was about building something good enough, then building it in quantities that made resistance mathematically impossible. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 was probably a better pure dogfighter than the P-47. The Focke-Wulf FW190 was more manoeuvrable. The British Spitfire was more beautiful. The P-51 Mustang had better range. But the P-47? The P-47 was American. It was overbuilt. It was over-engineered. It was too heavy and too expensive and too complex. It shouldn't have worked. But it did work, because American industry could afford to build 15,683 of them. Because American engineering could absorb the complexity of that turbocharger system and the massive R2800 engine. Because American industrial capacity could support them with an endless supply chain of parts, fuel, ammunition, and pilots. Alexander Kartveli, the Georgian immigrant who designed it, once said in a post-war interview, "We did not build a European fighter. We built an American fighter. Europeans design for elegance and efficiency because they must conserve resources. Americans build to win. If something needs to be twice as heavy and use twice the materials to be indestructible, Americans will build it twice as heavy." That philosophy, that uniquely American approach to engineering, saved thousands of pilots' lives. It helped destroy the Luftwaffe, and it demonstrated to the world what American industrial might could accomplish when fully mobilized. The young pilots who laughed at the flying milk bottle in 1942, many of them were alive at war's end, specifically because that milk bottle brought them home through fire, flak, and enemy fighters that would have killed them in any other aircraft. Today, when you see that radial engine, those broad wings, that thick fuselage, don't see a milk bottle. See a testament to American engineering. See the proof that sometimes the best solution isn't the most elegant one. It's the one that works, every time, no matter what. The P-47. Thunderbolt didn't just win battles. It embodied a philosophy. Build it strong. Build it tough. Build it to bring your people home. And then build 15,000 more. That's the American way. That's how you win a war.